Okay. Welcome to the webinar. So we had advertised this webinar to be talking about what you need to know about your insurance after the bushfires that we had in Victoria and New South Wales over the New Year period for 2020. And we are now today, the 3rd of April, and of course the last month or so, Covid-19 has gone crazy. So we've also got a whole lot of stuff to talk about. So for those who are joining us who don't know me, my name is Jackie Broman. I'm the Principal Solicitor at TBA Law. And I've got our guest today, Kate Fairley from Simplex Insurance. So we met last year at a Macedon Rangers Women in Business event. And I think that it's just such a great thing to be able to have someone who does a lot of insurance work to be able to come on and speak to everyone, particularly with all the events that have been happening. So, welcome, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
So good to see you. And you're looking great. We were just laughing actually that window open, window closed, but no, we're all looking great. We sound good. Everyone can hear us.
Excellent.
So let's jump straight in and talk about some of the things that have arisen from the bushfires first, and then we'll move on later to talk about how insurance might be impacted from the pandemic.
Sure thing.
So, bushfires. Are people worried about what they're covered for, how much they're covered for? What are the general things so far that you've had people worried about?
I guess it's always when it's front of mind, everyone's really concerned about it. And now I'm in the reverse position where people are really worried about how they can afford their insurance premiums. Bushfires aren't a risk anymore. And so they're looking at ways of reducing their cover, forgetting that you could have a lightning strike that completely decimates your property. But insurance is all about risk. And so I just, it's important that I have that conversation with my clients and advise them of all of the risks that they could need to be aware of. And then if they've made that informed decision, then it puts them in a much better position if something was to happen, because they're the ones who've made that choice. I think a lot of the pain and frustration and anger in bushfire claims in particular come from people who feel like they weren't given enough information and they weren't given the option of making a better choice. So particularly when dealing with direct insurers, they might not be encouraged to go for a higher sum insured. They might be encouraged to go for a higher excess or to not have certain types of policy coverage, like insuring their fences. Whereas as an insurance broker, it's my job to advocate for my clients' best interests rather than the insurer, and to make sure that they are the ones making the decision.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought of fences.
Yeah.
And so that's residential fences as well as farming fences.
Yeah, particularly on a farm pack, it's not that expensive to insure your fencing. But a lot of farmers take the position of, well, I do my own fences anyway, so if something happens, I'll just fix them, not realising the scale of the event that could happen.
Yeah. And I mean, in these events, sometimes there are stuff donated to help you get your fencing redone, but that's not guaranteed if it's not a major event. If it's just comes through a couple of properties, you're not going to get your stuff donated.
That's right. And that's why it's really frustrating to see these large-scale events and the amount of money and support that's given, because it does put people in this false sense of security, thinking that maybe I could do without this cover, or I don't need insurance at all. And then that reduces the premium pool that's available to be drawn on, making insurance overall more expensive for everybody. So it's very important that people don't just look at these catastrophe situations and make their insurance decisions based on that. They need to watch the news regularly and see that factory fire that happened, because a lot of people are under the false impression that concrete doesn't burn. It it can.
Yeah.
Completely destroyed.
Yeah,
So
even though it's still sitting there, the structural integrity's gone. Same with brick buildings, like the wall might be there, but the integrity's gone, and so it's a knockdown
absolutely.
anyway, isn't it? Yeah.
I've had clients there was a local chimney fire here for a local resident in July last year, and their house was completely like built of bluestone, and you'd think that wouldn't burn. The stone didn't burn, but all of the lime mortar that was used in between the stone just went to sand.
Yeah.
So that can't be used, and there's no stonemason with the capabilities to rebuild that building to what it was before. So they've made the decision together with the insurer to rebuild. What did they go with? I think they're going with like a fake hardy plank weatherboard, like the fire resistant stuff, but they're building a bigger house on a single story house because that's more appropriate for their needs now in their 60s and 70s. They don't want a double story bluestone building that's uneconomical to heat. So I think thinking about those things, when people have a loss, it's really like there's a lot of pressure from people saying, you know, that no one's helping me, no one's doing this, it's taking really long to rebuild, a really long time to get anything happening. And unfortunately, that is the case. It takes a long time in a normal claim situation to get building permits done, to get the site cleared, to make sure it's safe, that there's no asbestos in the building, because asbestos was used for a really long time in a lot of different building materials. So it's very important that people aren't risking their future health for the sake of getting things done quickly now. But when there's such a large scale of loss, things do take a bit longer. And if no one's been through a claim situation before, they won't have known that it normally takes a really long time and it's going to take even longer. So it's important for people to be patient and work through their emotions and just grieve.
Yeah. And I think that time that it takes, sometimes people decide not to rebuild then, don't they? They just go, well, we'll just restart somewhere else, potentially.
Yeah.
And you're right, the scale of it, even in terms of building permits, I can't imagine what it would be like in the local councils over there to actually be dealing with the applications.
Exactly.
To get those through, or there being enough resources to rebuild.
Getting the tradespeople.
Yeah, not even just human resources, but, you know, the building materials. And because I know that the car claims over there was so many, there was like 20,000 car windscreens, and there's just not that amount of windscreens in the country.
I think, and like we've got this COVID situation where we've got a finite amount of resources. There's not an unlimited supply of test kits for this stuff, or face masks, or surgical equipment. So I think, you know, it all just kind of needs to be put in perspective. Anytime that there's a really large loss or large situation, everything's going to just take that little bit longer.
Yes. So with having major fire events every 10 years or so in Victoria, or even more frequently, is it going to be something that insurers start excluding from their insurance?
Oh, no. I don't think we'll ever see a case where that you can't get insurance for particular areas. I personally live in the middle of a bushfire. I live in the middle of a forest. But my house has been there for 30 years, 40 years. Longer than me.
So I suppose why I'm asking that is that I know there's large areas of the country that are subject to flood, and so there's people who can't necessarily get insurance for flood. But they're not going to apply that, you don't think, to fire? Well, not yet anyway.
No. So the insurers, actually following the Brisbane floods, the Insurance Council of Australia did a lot of work pushing back against government, saying it's not our job to make sure that these known events are covered. It's your job to make sure that houses are built in the right place and that they're safe and that there isn't a definite risk of flood. It's like, so the Insurance Council of Australia pushed back and got a lot of flood mitigation work done to improve the pricing and acceptance of like ability to insure those types of properties. And we might see that with bushfire stuff too. So there are lots of insurers who are pricing themselves out of certain areas. So they'll just put a ridiculous $10,000 premium on a house that they don't want to insure. But then that's the benefit of dealing with an insurance broker, because we deal with about 7 or 8 home insurance providers. And so we can look at those different options for our clients and find someone who's still going to give them a decent price. At the moment, insurers don't really ask questions about fire mitigation. It's still very focused on theft. So have you got deadlocks? Have you got window locks? But we might see them asking more questions about, have you got enough water storage? Have you got sprinklers on your roof? Have you got double glazed windows?
Yes.
To just kind of improve that pricing and price according to risk.
Yeah, that's interesting. Things like how far away is the bush from the house, and do you have a clear space? Although we've seen that it doesn't matter how much of a clear space you have sometimes when there's spotting and embers. So, or it could be, the building of a wooden deck might put your house more at risk.
Or if you haven't repainted your house and you've got flaky paint, that can catch embers. And so you might have 2 houses next door to each other, one's gone, one's still standing. And it could have been a really minor difference of something like that saved their property. I think we saw examples of a pot plant catching fire and that got onto the deck and then burnt the house down, whereas the next door neighbour was okay. Fire is just completely random. It doesn't really make sense unless you've got a video camera recording it, seeing what's actually taken place. It's hard to know.
Potentially anyway.
Yeah, it's really hard to know why a particular house is still standing and why one isn't. Yeah.
All right. So on to contents then, I suppose, as well. Do you find that a lot of people under-insure their contents, and how do you sort of work out, to fully replace a 3 or 4 bedroom home, what you should be covered for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do have lots of clients who say, I don't want to insure my contents, I just want to insure my house. And it's really important that they check the policy wording, because every policy wording I've ever seen for owner-occupied residents, the definition of contents includes things like curtains and carpets, floating floorboards, and sometimes it can cost you 20 or 30 grand just to get the house to the point where you move into it, let alone replacing the appliances and the furniture and your clothes, your linen. So the rule of thumb from an expert claims consultant guy who's 70 odd years old, Alan Manning, he's an industry legend, and his rule of thumb is 30% of the sum of the building sum insured. So if you've got your house insured for 300,000, then you should consider insuring your contents for 100. Likewise, 600,000, 200. 500,000, you'd go 150, 175. So that's kind of a guideline. And then you talk to the client, I would talk to my client about what they've actually got. So if they've got little kids or even teenagers, they kind of have the same amount of stuff. But if it's a retiree couple and they wouldn't replace everything that they own, then we might go a bit less. So yeah, that is a good guideline, but it also relies on having the building sum insured right from the start. So Amy are a company who they offer the complete replacement benefit, and they don't get you to set a sum insured, but the Royal Commission really called that out and showed how inappropriate that was and how it left consumers in the lurch when it came to rebuilding, because they didn't know what they were entitled to. Amy was setting the goalposts there with that stuff, and you had people who were left with a very small amount of money to rebuild, often given cash settlements based on the cost that it would have been agreed with the insurer at trade rates, at wholesale rates, and then they've been left with this money that is just nowhere near sufficient to rebuild their house. So
that's a really interesting example. Yeah. So I only just sold my house recently myself, and up until then, so this is only 2019, I was insured with Amy and would have the complete replacement without the value set. So they hadn't changed that.
They have a value built into the background, because insurance, like the cost of insurance it's a mathematical equation. It's a rate. And so they need a sum insured to calculate the premium. They can't just decide. Like there was always a figure in the background. And a lot of people get peace of mind from having that total replacement cover. But yeah, from the Royal Commission and the stories that came out from that, there were a lot of stories before that were just, people's individual circumstances. But the Royal Commission highlighted that was really not in the customer's best interests.
Yeah. Diana has asked a question. I'm not sure if she asked it before we were talking about the potential that insurers start asking about, things to mitigate fire. So she said, will there be loadings?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I did have a lot of people call me in January saying, are my premiums going to go up because of this event? And I don't believe that they will, because we had like year after year, like 3 consecutive years of insurance, because we have like our own online newsletters, and we have you get your news from your mainstream sources. We get insurance news and articles and updates daily. And so in the lead up to the year just gone and the 2 years before that, we were receiving a lot of information from industry experts saying that we're heading for our worst bushfire season yet. And then it didn't happen 2 years in a row, and then it did happen. So insurers take that information seriously, and they have been pricing themselves accordingly for the last 3 years. So they were prepared, and they had enough premium resources to cover these losses. They knew that it was coming, and I don't think that we will see very large increases moving forward just because of this one-off bushfire catastrophe. Even though it was really huge, it hasn't been that bad. It might affect. I saw an article yesterday. So there's a thing called crop insurance, and there was a very large plantation on Kangaroo Island, and the claim, they've agreed to a settlement of $10 million for trees. And then they're still negotiating all of the houses that were owned as part of that plantation for the people who I think worked on the plantation, and that's $4 million. So they're very large losses, but these things they've done their best to price themselves accordingly, knowing that this was coming.
Okay. So we don't have insurance companies falling over and not being able to pay policies.
No, that's not going to happen. And Diana's question about people living in higher risk areas. So I think that's why it's important not just to stick with the insurer and get the one answer from a direct insurance company. It's free to get a quote from an insurance broker and find out what other options are available through those channels, because sometimes intermediaries have access to other insurers that don't go direct to the public, and they might have better pricing. So it doesn't cost you anything to contact the broker and get a quote. That process is completely free.
Yeah. But I suppose also what you're saying is that unlike with the flood situation, where if you build in a flood zone, you have difficulty getting insurance. If we're still building close to a fire area, we're not necessarily going to have different pricing just yet.
No, and also like if a house was built post 2009, that means it's been built to the current BAL rating standard. So the bushfire attack level system that was introduced following the Black Saturday bushfires, it didn't really get a lot of media attention until the 2013 Blue Mountains bushfires, because there were a lot of people there who got caught out with having their homes insured for half of what it would cost to actually replace according to the new standards that had been introduced. And there was a lot of hurt and anger and blame, saying, why didn't anyone tell me that I needed to double my home insurance, sum insured? And then the Insurance Council of Australia were not the greatest at, they just put the onus kind of back onto the individual, saying it's your responsibility to make sure your home's insured correctly, and that doesn't really help anybody. So I think, it was a really unfortunate event, but it did bring it to light, and now a lot more people are aware that that is something that they have to factor into setting their sum insured.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Is that a
Again,
question,
yeah.
Diana? No.
Still uncertain. How about we come back and we'll answer that at the end, because I want to move on and talk about what we've now got with the pandemic as well.
Yeah.
So there's so many factors, I suppose, with the pandemic. And I suppose a lot of it, we're thinking commercial clients, insurance-wise. What are the impacts, though, for the ordinary person, for a not necessarily someone who has an investment, so just ordinary mum and dad that has their own home? Do you think that there's any impact on insurance with this pandemic?
Oh, I don't believe so.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
from a premium perspective and payments, and the Insurance Council is yet to come out with an industry-wide response to the issue of being able to afford your insurance premiums. But nobody wants to see people without insurance. The people who work in the insurance industry want people to be insured, because we see the claims, we know that the hurt that can happen, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. So I think it's important that if people are in financial distress, that they contact their insurer and try and come up with an arrangement if they're on monthly installments and haven't prepaid for the year. Because a lot of insurers are being really lenient and really trying to work with their clients to make sure that they stay insured. We've got other considerations with business insurance, like, because there's so many like sole traders, so many like mums and dads, they work for themselves. And so I've got clients who have completely stopped their liability cover because they can't do any work, and there's no risk from an occurrence situation. So like a handyman, if his work is completely dried up, his policy is up for renewal, he doesn't know when he's going to be able to work again. We have that conversation, and if he really believes that there's not going to be any incidents whatsoever because he's not doing any work, then we have that conversation and agree on whether his policy should just be stopped for the time being, and then he would hopefully get in touch with us to restart that back up as soon as he's ready to go again.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So it's a way of saving if you're sort of on hold with your business.
Yeah, but it's really like that. The conversation has to be really specific to the client's needs, because if someone's in an advice-based business like you and I, or even like an allied health kind of situation, if they've got professional indemnity insurance component to their policy, we'd really like them to try and keep that in place to the greatest extent possible, because the minute professional indemnity stops, there's no cover. Even if they had a policy in place when the incident occurred, the policy is triggered from when the claim is made against you. So if you stop your policy and then someone says, I've had harm from something that happened 2 months ago, you're going to be stuck without cover.
All right, so don't touch your professional indemnity. Public liability, though, is potentially something that you could put on hold if you're not working. Now, what if you're still working? I've still got people coming in occasionally who still need to sign things. Will I have an issue with my public liability if someone says that they caught COVID-19 in my office?
At the moment, I haven't seen any exclusions come up so far. So in the past, I mentioned this in my email the other day. Like it's really funny to look back at old policy documents. My first insurance job was as a receptionist, and I didn't really know what I was looking at. But one of my jobs was to scan in all the old files, and so I remember seeing files that were from around the 1999 period, where there was a Y2K exclusion put on them. So when like insurers were with, there was a lot of noise and a lot of information being put forward about possibilities of certain things happening. And when it's going to be such a large scale event, insurance isn't designed to pick up a global catastrophe. So there was, some insurers put on a Y2K exclusion. And then like when we had the bird flu situation, there's still, Allianz still have an avian flu exclusion on their farm package policies that they haven't dropped off yet. It is swine flu, mad cow disease, all of those things, the exclusions did come in after the event kind of happened to make sure that if there was any future situations like that it wouldn't be picked up. But they take a lot of time to get through and to have the endorsements drafted and have the exclusions put in place, because insurers, they take the view that insurance is supposed to cover you for the unexpected and unforeseen. So at the moment, COVID-19 is an unexpected, unforeseen situation, and they're not going to say you should have known that this global catastrophe was going to happen, because nobody knew that this was coming.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good to know. So maybe when we do our renewals, you
might start to see something come up, but I think it will be some time before that happens.
Yep. Yes, so Diana has a client whose broker told her she couldn't reduce her public liability while her business isn't operating. So she had to cancel it to save the money.
It might have been a situation if she was already on the minimum turnover, because public liability premiums are usually determined by the person's turnover, or in the case of a retail business, sometimes the staff numbers. So if you think your turnover is going to be completely decimated from this situation, then you could drop that right back to the minimum.
So not a small turnover though.
Yeah, that business's turnover of $1 million, maybe she should have been able to have a conversation with her broker to reduce that turnover, to reduce her premium.
Rather than cancel it altogether.
Yeah, and a lot of insurers, that broker's obviously, I don't know, it's hard to say. It's really hard to speak to another situation, but it does sound very odd. And like, I am trying to keep up to date with every single update from each insurance company. We deal with like so many different insurers, but I'm trying to stay across all of that information, storing it in a little COVID folder in my Outlook so that if someone contacts me saying, what are my options, I can then refer back to the latest advice from their insurer and give them some information that's going to really help them and support them. That's
okay. So it's I suppose you don't have to, like anything, you can shop around for advice, can't you, as well?
Definitely.
The other thing that you raised as well was for landlords where tenants are defaulting on rent. Yeah,
so at the moment I haven't seen anyone who is still offering rent default cover for residential or commercial tenancies. CGU have a padlock product that they have designed for commercial property owners. It's one of the only commercial property owner products I've seen available where you can have rent default for a commercial tenant. But they've said that they're not going to offer that for new policies, and they're not going to allow it to be added onto existing policies. So I think it's just going back to the bushfires and large losses, and when a flood's coming or a major hailstorm event is coming, insurers will often put what's called an embargo in place to make sure that people can't take out insurance just because they know an event is going to happen. Usually that's written into policy wordings too, with a 72-hour exclusion. There was a situation, there was Christmas Day or Boxing Day fires a couple of years ago on the Geelong coast, and a lady got really pissed off because she took out a policy the night before, when the fire was coming at her. She took it out online with RACV, and then they knocked her claim back, and she's like, you can't knock my claim back. But that is something that insurers are, sorry, my phone's buzzing, I'm just gonna make it go away. That is something that insurers can legally do to make sure that their premium pool is protected for the people who've done the right thing and paid for their insurance for the year, not knowing that something was going to happen. So it's the same with rent default now.
Yep.
We know that it's very likely that people will default on their rent and not be able to pay. And so you can't have that insurance cover at the moment.
Yeah. So people just have to go back to their banks, really, don't they? If they've got a mortgage they can't pay. And if otherwise they've just got to suck it up. If that was their only income is as a landlord, well,
yeah, it's really hard. Like a lot of the time the news is skewed to the people who are the most vulnerable, who have those lower income jobs in rental situations, and can't kick those people out of their homes. But what if their landlord is a retiree who relies on that income to buy their own groceries?
Yeah.
Or what if it's a 20-something-year-old who doesn't have the savings in the bank? They've bought this investment property trying to get ahead in life, and then suddenly their tenant isn't paying any rent, and like they're putting their future in jeopardy, risking going into default and then ruining their credit rating for the next 10 years as a 20-year-old. So I think there's always two sides, and people need to just keep that perspective when looking at these awful situations.
So we spoke about rent default mainly on commercial then. So there's still some policies people may have taken out for residential that will have defaults built in.
Yeah. And if that happens, if you've got that cover in place,
use it.
Use it, because your claim will be valid. They can't retroactively say we're not going to cover this now because now we know it's going to happen. That's just not a thing. It's just that you can't get the cover if you need it.
Okay. So residential investors should be in a better position in many ways than some commercial landlords.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Any other things that are really coming up for you at the moment with questions around insurance and COVID-19?
I think when it comes to property cover, it's really important that people keep that going if they can afford to. Use the resources, like use the funding that's being provided and the support that's it's great. Normally when you have a situation and we're like, we'll support you, but really that's just holding your hand. This time support is actually cold hard cash. So if you're getting that in, use it to insure your properties and keep that going, because we could see an increase in thefts and burglaries and malicious damage and vandalism, and you still have the risk of electrical fires and storm damage. We've got shitty weather here in Kyneton today, and those are still very real risks to people. And if you are already in a financial hardship, to not have insurance for those risks would put you in a really terrible situation. So if that's why insurers, they recognize that, and they are on the same page there, and they want to keep you insured if they can. So if that means giving you a 3-month break on monthly installments so you can catch up later, then they will do that to make sure that you stay a loyal customer and can come through the other side.
Yeah, great point. Fantastic. All right, shall we bring Diana in? Michelle, do you have any questions as well? Trying to unmute you, Diana.
Your question.
Got you. So do you want to go back to the fire thing first?
No, you answered that. Sorry, I was answering something else there.
No, that's okay.
Good. All right. So I think we also answered your question around the woman whose broker told her to cancel her public liability, but she could have probably reduced it instead.
Yeah, so I thought that was a little bit of a strange answer because, they've just gone back to a holding pattern where, the business is still there, but it can't trade at the moment. So I also made the suggestion that she revisit that.
Definitely, because there's still risks of when you're a property owner or a tenant. If you have a fire, I don't know what that person's situation is, but say they have a fire that was like these computer screens. if you have them on standby, they can just combust and start a fire. And have a lot of office fires start from those computer screens being left on standby, which I do all the time. But if the fire started from a property that you own, then most of the time you will be legally liable for any resulting damage to neighbouring businesses and properties. And that's a liability issue. So it's very important that people keep their liability cover, even if they're not doing anything. There's still very, very small, but real risks at play.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll get back onto that then. Thanks.
And your other question was that you had that other person who was told that their public liability was removed from their policy.
Okay, so that was actually a hairdresser. So given that they are still able to trade, but it's preferable that they're not in close contact with people. She just made the comment the other day that their public liability was now removed. And I thought maybe insurers were suddenly panicking because there's no inclusion or exclusion mentioning pandemic and they don't want to be connected. I don't know.
I don't think that is something that they would. I don't think they would stand up in.
They can't remove something in an existing policy that's already in place.
No, there has to be material
I wouldn't
change
have
in the
thought
risk.
so. So you've not heard of that? Yeah.
No. So say someone fails to disclose a criminal conviction and that gets brought out in a claim situation or something like that, then the insurer, because there's been a change in the information provided, then the insurer can decide to decline cover and cancel the insurance back to inception in that type of situation. But they can't just
compromised info.
I don't believe that they can do that midterm unless their policy was up for renewal.
All right, I'll follow up that conversation as well.
And like I've still got hairdressers insured, so if she's currently with a direct insurer, I'd encourage her to go to a broker and get some cover.
Yes, agreed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anything else on your mind?
Oh, lots, but that's probably all I can throw at you. Thank you.
I don't mind.
Haven't heard from Michelle. Michelle, there is a chat button down the bottom. If you wanted to type something in and then we can bring you in. Or there's a Q&A button as well, but there's nothing in that one at the moment.
One of the things that we didn't talk about already was business interruption cover. So if a business has business interruption cover to protect their income following a loss, I haven't seen a policy where it's been able to respond to this event, which is really sad and really unfortunate. But I think that's because of this, it's because of the scale of the event. So there's an additional benefit in most BI policies for infectious diseases where the outbreak occurs within 20 kilometres of a business. But because it's like a global thing, the insurance companies can't support an event of that scale. So unfortunately, there's no cover there, but it's great that the government are stepping in this situation and providing a lot of real, tangible, actual support through the JobKeeper stuff and the loans to small business. I've got a hire car operator who has got his cars off the road because no one's getting taken to the airport at the moment. But he's been able to secure a government loan so that he can continue. We've put his insurance payments on hold temporarily while he gets the money. And then once the money comes in, he'll be able to restart that and keep his vehicles insured in case they're stolen or damaged while he's not able to operate. Oh, that's another thing with vehicle insurance. So if someone trucks are still on the road, but if if a construction company was to get shut down for any reason, there are a lot of commercial vehicle insurers who are allowing their clients to put their vehicles onto layup cover at a heavily reduced rate. So if they're not being used at all, they're just sitting in a shed being kept safe, then they will be able to have reduced premiums to cover them for fire, impact, storm damage while they're not in use. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's good to know. Diana's just asked an extra question about holiday rentals. So landlords owning a holiday rental and cancellations are obviously getting booked, cancellations getting booked, bookings getting cancelled.
That one's a bit tricky because it's generally like you can't insure that risk. It's kind of like rent default, but for, unfortunately, you've got loss of rent cover for an insured event. So if the property burns to the ground, the Airbnb burns to the ground, there's usually a loss of rent benefit that you can have to protect your income, and then it'll be based on lost bookings and also past bookings, and they'll work out what a fair and reasonable amount is to cover that lost income. But because this isn't an insured event in a landlord's property damage situation, it's unlikely that that would be covered, unfortunately.
Because the property is not actually affected by anything.
Yeah. So one of the downsides of having your house on Airbnb, like if you had a full-time, pros and cons with everything, and unfortunately this is just one of those really unforeseen, unexpected events that's
very much so. All right. All right, well, I don't think there's any other questions. Michelle, I'm just trying to unmute you to say hello and goodbye. Diana, I've just unmuted you as well.
Thanks for that, ladies. That was very helpful. Nice to see you again, Kate. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. If and you can put my contact info in any of the notes or whatever. So if anyone has any specific questions that they want some advice on, feel free to get in touch. I'm not an accountant. I don't charge by the minute.
Accountants don't either. We don't either.
No, I'm guilty of that. Not every minute, every 6 minutes.
So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, but it's just information that's in my brain. If it can help somebody else, I'm happy to share it. It's not a problem.
Terrific. Thank you. That's great.
Your email's there. I just popped it in case anyone wants to cut and paste that out of the chat. But in the email, I'm going to send out another email to everyone who booked today with this recording and your details so that they've got that.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for having me.